Okay, I want you to picture a scenario. We've probably all been there, right? You've got this massive project, it lands on your desk, and you suddenly realize, oh no, I need a very specific expert,
Hmm.
like maybe a data scientist, but just for, say, 3 months. So what do? You dip into the market,
Right.
you start trying to find that person, and boom, instantly there's friction.
Ah, the friction, yes. The time suck, the energy drain that we almost never actually put a number on.
Totally. I mean, you could spend days just trying to find potential people, can't you?
Yeah.
You're scrolling through profiles, you're vetting them, sending out feelers, maybe waiting a whole week just to get a few quotes back. That alone is pure cost, just finding the information.
The information retrieval, yeah. And then assuming you actually find someone promising.
Oh, then the real fun starts.
Aha, right.
You're spending hours, maybe days, negotiating the exact scope. You're trying to detail every single little deliverable, talking about IP rights, trying to write this watertight statement of work that predicts every possible issue for the next, 90 days?
And don't forget getting legal involved.
Mhm.
Procurement probably wants a look too.
Yeah.
So you're drafting the super specific, legally binding thing for what's essentially a short burst of really complex work.
And what if things change? What if you need them to pivot halfway through?
Back to the negotiation table.
Yeah.
Or you're writing addendums to the contract. It's just this huge logistical, legal coordination nightmare.
It sounds exhausting just talking about it.
Yeah.
And if you actually added up all the internal hours, your time, legal's time, finance checking invoices, it's incredibly
Yeah.
expensive. Way more than just the price you agreed with the contractor.
Absolutely.
Okay, but now contrast that whole painful market dance with this. You walk like 20 feet across your office, or maybe just ping someone on Slack,
Hmm.
and you tell your salaried in-house data analyst, hey, need you to drop what you're doing. We need this algorithm built by Friday. Use this new data set.
They just do it.
They just do it. That's it. One simple instruction, and the resource, the person, moves. No new contract, no haggling over price, no legal review meeting. The efficiency jump is just staggering.
And that right there, that feeling, that contrast, that is the huge paradox. The million-dollar question that classical economics kind of stumbled over for decades. Until, that is, Ronald Coase came along in 1937 with his paper, The Nature of the Firm.
Okay, wait, what exactly is the paradox? Because, intuitively, we all know companies exist. It seems obvious.
Well, yeah, it seems obvious now. But the paradox comes from the core assumption of, pure classical economic theory. If the free market, Adam Smith's invisible hand, is supposedly the most efficient way to coordinate everything.
Right, matching supply and demand, getting resources where they need to go through prices.
Exactly. If the market's perfect at that, why on earth do we need companies? Why have these structures at all?
If the market worked perfectly, we'd all just be individual freelancers constantly contracting with each other for every little task.
Precisely. Classical economists like Sir Arthur Salter talked about the economy as this self-adjusting organism. Everything just coordinates automatically through prices, no central planning needed.
Like a beautiful, complex machine running on price signals.
Yeah. But then you look around, and reality, as the economist D.H. Robertson put it so well, reality is full of these islands of conscious power floating in this ocean of unconscious cooperation.
Islands of conscious power. You mean companies, offices,
Yeah.
factories.
Exactly. Places where deliberate planning, what Coase called entrepreneurial allocation, completely takes over from the price mechanism. Think about it. If an accountant moves from marketing to finance inside your company, it's not because the market price for accounting services suddenly changed.
No, it's because their boss told them to move.
They were ordered to. Direction replaced price.
Okay, so that's the mission for this deep dive then. We're tackling maybe the most basic economic question there is. Why do we even have bosses? Why does this internal plan system, this island, take over from the supposedly perfect market inside its borders? We're diving into Coase's big paper to find out the shocking hidden reason your company actually exists.
And Coase's answer, when you boil it down, is actually beautifully simple. But it was revolutionary. It all comes down to one thing: the cost of using the market itself.
Okay, let's unpack that. The cost of using the market. So Coase looks around, he sees these giant firms,
Right.
go back to maybe Ford, the big railroads, and he notices that inside the walls of these companies, the economic rules seem totally different.
Right.
The price mechanism, that invisible hand, it's basically been switched off inside the firm. So in Coase's view, what's the defining feature? What makes a firm a firm?
It is exactly that. The supersession of the price mechanism. That's the key. In a let's say, theoretically perfect market, every single transaction, whether you need a paperclip or a new CEO, should technically be handled by negotiating a price and maybe signing some kind of contract.
Okay.
But inside the firm, the entrepreneur or the manager coordinates all those things directly through authority, through direction. Which brings us right back to that core question. Why is setting up this internal hierarchy, this sort of mini dictatorship of direction, actually profitable?
Why does it make economic sense to stop using the market for certain things?
Because, and this is the absolute core of it, there is a real measurable cost to using the price mechanism. It's not free. We tend to only think about the obvious cost, the price tag on the final good or service.
Yeah, what you paid the supplier.
Right. But Coase said, hang on, you have to count everything else. All the friction, all the hassle. He called these transaction costs.
Transaction costs. Okay, so this is the hidden friction, the stuff that makes the market feel sticky or slow sometimes. What specific costs did Coase actually point to? What makes buying stuff on the open market expensive beyond the sticker price?
He identified a couple of major ones. First, there are discovery costs. This is just the sheer effort, the time, the money it takes to even figure out what the relevant prices are.
So finding the right supplier, getting different quotes, checking their quality, comparing options.
Exactly. All that research is the time you spend on Google, checking different platforms, calling around just to make sure you're getting a decent deal and not getting ripped off.
And even if, specialists pop up like brokers or comparison websites who sell you that information.
The cost doesn't disappear from the system, does it? It's just been shifted. Someone's still incurred it, and now you're paying the specialist for it. And for really complex or specialized things, that discovery cost can be huge.
Okay, so discovery costs. What's the other big one?
The second one is where I think a lot of the real-world pain comes in, and that's contract costs.
The legal headaches we talked about earlier.
Precisely. It's the cost of negotiating, drafting, and then enforcing a separate, often complex contract for every single exchange that happens on the market. Imagine if you had to do that constantly for every tiny input, every small service you needed.
You'd spend all your time writing contracts and arguing about clauses.
You'd need a massive legal department. And Coase actually mentions Professor Usher, who had this great point about it. He observed that all the successive buying and selling of partly finished products was just sheer waste of energy.
Right, like a car part moving between 5 different specialist workshops, and each time there's a new negotiation, a new contract, new quality checks.
It's just layers and layers of friction. And the firm, Coase argued, is the brilliant workaround. Inside the firm, that whole complicated, high-friction mess of constant market contracts gets replaced by one single overarching contract.
The employment agreement.
Exactly. The employment contract is the shortcut. Basically, the worker agrees to take a certain wage, their salary. And in return, they agree to obey the directions of the entrepreneur or their manager within certain limits. That within certain limits is crucial, both legally and economically.
So that's the trade-off. Predictable pay for agreeing to be directed.
That's the essence of it. Within those agreed limits, your job role, normal working hours, that sort of thing, the manager directs what happens, they allocate resources, tell people what to work on, and they bypass that constant, costly need to go back to the market and negotiate every little thing. This central direction becomes a different and often cheaper way to coordinate production, specifically when those transaction costs outside are high.
Okay, but that raises a really interesting point, especially thinking about modern jobs. Why can't we just write like a super duper detailed contract up front that covers every possible thing that might happen? Couldn't that avoid the need for this whole firm structure?
Well, that gets into the whole issue of uncertainty and something we now call bounded rationality. Coase pointed this out very clearly. When you need a contract that covers a longer period, say a whole year, it becomes incredibly hard, maybe even impossible, to predict everything.
You just don't know today exactly what you'll need that employee to be doing 6 months down the line, right?
Right.
Technologies change, markets shift.
Absolutely. You can't foresee all the specific tasks, the adaptations, the new priorities that will come up. So the longer the relationship needs to be, the less practical it is for the buyer, the employer, to specify exactly what the other party, the employee, has to do in every single future situation.
So the contract has to be kind of vague.
Well, more general. It covers the broad scope, the main responsibilities, but it leaves the specific details, the day-to-day direction of resources, to be decided later by the entrepreneur or manager.
And that flexibility, that ability to redirect people quickly without renegotiating, that's the superpower the firm gives you.
Exactly. And it also helps explain why firms seem much more essential for organizing services, especially complex labor, compared to just buying standardized commodities.
Right, because with a standard bolt or something, you can specify every dimension and material property in the contract perfectly up front. But with a person's skills.
It's much harder. You're buying their capacity to adapt and follow directions within a domain. So the entrepreneur's main value in this view is their ability to coordinate things internally more cheaply. They have to direct resources at less cost than the total transaction costs you'd face trying to achieve the same coordination through the open market.
And the market is always there as the ultimate judge, isn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, if the manager gets it wrong, if their internal bureaucracy and meetings actually cost more than just dealing with the market friction they were trying to avoid.
Yes. Then the firm becomes inefficient. It might shrink, it might fail, because those factors of production, the employees, the suppliers, they always have the option to just leave and go back to dealing directly on the open market.
The market provides the escape hatch.
It does. And just one more point on this section. Coase also noted that sometimes external things, like government actions, can nudge the balance of costs.
You mean like taxes?
Yeah, the classic example is a sales tax. Typically, a sales tax applies when goods or services are bought and sold between different companies, a market transaction.
Okay.
But usually that same tax does not apply if the same activity happens inside the company. Like, if one division sells something to another division internally.
So the tax hits the market deal, but not the internal one.
Right. So by taxing the market transaction but not the internal coordination, the government unintentionally makes organizing things inside the firm relatively cheaper. It creates an artificial incentive for firms to grow larger, maybe through vertical integration, just to avoid paying the tax. It pushes the boundary of the firm outwards.
Fascinating. That's a great example of how policy can accidentally shape company structure. Okay, so let's recap section 1. Coase's big revelation. The company exists because using the market has hidden costs, transaction costs. The firm is basically a clever contractual shortcut, replacing endless market deals with a command structure that lets managers direct resources, especially when things are uncertain. Got it. That's the why. Right, so we figured out why firms exist. They save on those pesky transaction costs. Organizing stuff internally can be cheaper than constantly dealing with the market. But hang on, if that's true, why doesn't it lead to, well, one giant company doing everything?
Exactly. That's the logical follow-up question, isn't it? If firms are so efficient, why isn't the entire global economy run by a single massive corporation? Why do we still have competition in markets between firms?
Yes. What stops the growth?
And this is where Coase really pushed back against some earlier ideas. You had economists like Professor Knight who basically threw up their hands and said determining how big a firm gets is largely a matter of personality and historical accident.
Which sounds a bit like saying, we don't really know. An intellectual cop-out, maybe?
Coase thought so. He insisted, no, we can analyze this scientifically. We can use standard economic tools, specifically the idea of the margin and substitution.
Okay, how does that apply here?
Well, think about how a firm grows. It gets larger by bringing more transactions under its internal control, right? It decides to make something in-house instead of buying it, or hires an employee instead of using a contractor. These are transactions that could have been done on the market.
Okay, so it's pulling transactions in.
Right. And the concept of the margin tells us where that process stops. There must be a limit.
And what is that limit?
The limit is reached when the cost of organizing one more transaction inside the firm becomes equal to the cost of carrying out that same transaction on the open market, or, having another, maybe more specialized firm do it.
The equilibrium point.
Exactly. It's a balancing act. The firm keeps expanding, pulling in transactions as long as the internal organization cost is lower than the market transaction cost. But eventually, the internal costs start to rise. And once organizing that next transaction internally costs more than just buying it outside, the firm should stop growing. It should use the market for that transaction.
Okay, so transaction costs pull things into the firm. What makes the internal costs go up? What's the force pushing things back out towards the market? This is where we get into the idea of diminishing returns to management, isn't it?
That's precisely it. As firms get bigger, they start becoming victims of their own size and complexity. Coase identified 3 main reasons why these internal organization costs inevitably start to climb, putting a brake on unlimited growth.
Okay, Let's break them down. What's the first one? Probably the most obvious.
Bureaucracy itself, just rising organization costs. This is the pure administrative overhead. As you add more people, more departments, more internal transactions to manage, you need more managers, more meetings, more reports, more complex communication channels. Information gets distorted as it travels up and down the hierarchy. Decisions slow down. People spend time navigating internal politics instead of doing productive work. All that administrative friction is a real measurable cost.
Yeah, we've all felt that one.
Yeah.
The 5-person startup makes a decision in like 15 minutes.
Right.
The 50,000-person behemoth needs 6 committees in 3 months to approve
But
the same thing.
exactly. That overhead doesn't just grow linearly with size. It often grows much faster. Okay, so that's the first rising cost. The second one is about mistakes, increased mistakes and waste.
You mean managers just aren't perfect? Managerial inefficiency.
Pretty much. The bigger the firm gets, and especially the more different kinds of things it tries to do under one roof, the harder it is for the managers at the top to make optimal decisions. They just can't know everything. They inevitably start misallocating resources. They fail to put the right people, the best equipment, the capital, where it would generate the most economic value. This waste happens because it's just really hard to get accurate, timely, unfiltered information from the front lines up through layers of management.
So this is the cost of bad decisions that happen simply because the organization is too big and complex for anyone to fully grasp. Like, a huge company might have an amazing internal team capable of doing some new project, but management, 5 levels up, doesn't even know they exist or what they can do because the info gets lost. So they end up outsourcing the work, maybe paying more for lower quality. That's the waste Coase is talking about.
That's a perfect example of that kind of managerial waste due to scale. Okay, but the third rising cost. This one I find particularly interesting because it's so human. It's the rising factor supply price.
The human element, fighting back against the machine. Tell me more.
Coase observed that factors of production, which really means skilled employees, talented managers, creative people, they often value things other than just salary. They value the other advantages that tend to be more common in smaller firms.
Like what?
Well, the big one is independence, autonomy, the feeling of being, as Coase put it, one's own master, or at least having a clear, direct impact on things, seeing your work make a difference.
Okay, so if I'm a really top-tier software developer, I might actually prefer working for a smaller, more agile company where I have more say, even if a giant corporation offers me slightly more money.
Precisely that. As a firm gets larger, becomes more bureaucratic, has more rigid roles, it often loses that sense of autonomy and direct impact. So to attract and keep that same high-caliber talent, the people who really value independence, the big firm, often has to pay them more. They have to offer a wage premium to compensate for the less appealing work environment, the bureaucracy they have to put up with.
So that extra salary needed to lure someone away from a smaller, more autonomous setup is actually a rising internal organization cost for the big firm.
Exactly. It's the price the big firm pays for demanding submission to its hierarchy. It acts as another brake on growth. It's the entrepreneurial spirit demanding a fee, essentially.
That's a really powerful idea. A human-level check on corporate size.
It is. And Coase also pointed out some dynamic things that can shift these costs around, changing the optimal size of the firm over time. 3 big ones were spatial distribution, the dissimilarity of activities, and market volatility.
Okay, spatial distribution, that's distance, right?
Yeah. Historically, trying to manage operations spread over a large geographical area was very costly. Lots of travel, slow communication.
But technology changes that.
Hugely. Coase noted even back then that things like the telephone and telegraph were reducing the cost of organizing over distance. And today, you think about the internet, video conferencing, collaborative software, global logistics networks. All these things make it cheaper to manage spatially distributed operations.
So technology tends to increase the potential efficient size of a firm, allowing for global companies that weren't feasible before.
Generally, yes, it lowers that specific organization cost. But the second factor, dissimilarity, pushes the other way.
Meaning trying to do too many different things.
Exactly. The more unrelated the activities a single firm tries to manage, say, running a chain of coffee shops and a biotech research lab and a trucking company all under one CEO, the higher the organization costs tend to explode. Why? Because the specialized knowledge needed to effectively direct those vastly different operations becomes impossible for one management structure to handle well.
You lose focus, expertise gets diluted.
Right. And the third one, Price volatility in the market also plays a role. If the prices of inputs or outputs are changing rapidly and unpredictably, it becomes more costly and risky to lock things into a stable internal structure. Sometimes it's better to rely on the flexibility of the market in those situations.
This whole framework also gives us a really clear way to think about things like mergers or outsourcing, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Coase gives us definitions. When two separate firms merge, that's combination transactions previously organized by two entrepreneurs, now organized by one. When a firm decides to stop buying something on the market and start making it itself like a car company, deciding to build its own engines instead of buying them from a supplier that's integration, specifically vertical integration.
And the decision to do that, or the decision to later outsource the engine manufacturing again.
It all comes back to that marginal calculation. Is it now cheaper to organize this internally, or is it cheaper to use the market? Whichever way the balance of transaction costs versus internal organization costs tips, that's the rational economic move. The boundary of the firm is constantly adjusting based on these relative costs. It's not random, it's driven by this cost comparison.
Okay, Coase's framework seems really elegant and logical. Transaction costs pull things in, organization costs push things out, find the balance. But as you mentioned, he wasn't writing in a vacuum. Other smart people had tried to explain why firms exist before 1937. Why did Coase feel he needed to specifically address, and maybe rebut, those other theories?
Yeah, that's really important context. For his theory to stick, Coase needed to show it wasn't just an explanation, but a better, more fundamental explanation than what was already out there. He needed to clear the ground, so to speak. The first big competing idea he took on was centered around the division of labor.
Right, the idea from people like Professor Usher or Maurice Dobb. What was their core argument? How did specialization explain the firm?
Their basic point was, look, as economies get more complex, work gets broken down into smaller and smaller specialized tasks. This high degree of specialization is efficient, but it could lead to chaos if there wasn't some kind of integrating force coordinating all these specialists.
So the firm arises to be that coordinator, to manage the complexity of specialization.
That was the suggestion. The firm provides the necessary conscious planning to make sure all the specialized pieces fit together.
Seems plausible. What was Coase's issue with that?
His counter-argument was incredibly powerful and kind of turned economic theory back on itself. He basically said, wait a minute. What has economic science been telling us for the last 150 years? The price mechanism is the integrating force. The market itself, through supply and demand and price signals, is perfectly capable of coordinating incredibly complex specialization without central planning. That's like Econ 101. So the division of labor theory doesn't actually explain why you need an entrepreneur directing things instead of the price mechanism.
It explains the need for coordination, but not why coordination happens inside a firm instead of through the market.
Exactly. It failed to explain the critical substitution of direction for price. That was Coase's core critique. Okay, so that was one down. But the really big contender, the theory that probably had the most influence at the time, was Professor Knight's theory based on uncertainty.
Right, Frank Knight.
Yeah.
His argument was all about risk and prediction, wasn't it?
Yes, very much so. Knight argued that the fundamental issue is that the future is uncertain. Economic outcomes are unpredictable. Because of this, you get a split in society.
Yeah.
You have the risk-averse majority, the doubtful and timid workers who prefer a guaranteed stable income.
Okay.
And then you have a smaller group of more confident, venturesome individuals, the entrepreneurs, who are willing to deal with the uncertainty. They step up, guarantee the fixed wages to the workers, and in return, they claim the residual fluctuating income, the profit or loss. They bear the risk.
Makes sense. But how did Knight connect that risk-bearing directly to the need for a firm structure, for managerial control?
That was the crucial link he made. Knight argued that if you're the one guaranteeing the wage, if you're the one taking the financial risk based on the outcome of the work, then you must have the power to direct that work. He famously said it would be impracticable or very unusual for one man to guarantee to another a definite result without being given power to direct his work.
Basically, if I'm paying your salary regardless of results, I need to be able to tell you what to do to try and ensure good results.
That was the logic. Control follows risk.
Seems pretty compelling, too. How did Coase challenge that? He saw flaws there as well.
He did. He saw two main problems with making uncertainty the sole reason for direction. First, he pointed out that just having better knowledge or foresight about the uncertain future doesn't automatically mean you need to become a manager and direct people's work.
What's the alternative?
You can just sell your knowledge. Think about consulting firms, market forecasters, investment analysts. They possess superior judgment about uncertain futures, but they sell that judgment as advice or information on the market. The people buying the advice make the final decisions and direct their own resources. They don't typically hire the consultants as employees subject to their internal direction just because they bought a report.
Okay. You can separate superior knowledge from direct control. What was the second flaw Coase saw?
The second one, I think, cuts even deeper. It goes back to how markets actually work. Coase pointed out that Knight's core premise that guaranteeing a result necessitates direction is often just plain wrong in the real world.
How so?
Think about all the work that gets done to contract. You hire a building company to construct an office block for a fixed price. You are guaranteeing them a definite sum if they deliver the specified building.
Right.
But you typically don't stand over the builders telling them how to mix the concrete or which supplier to use for windows. You've contracted for a result, guaranteed a payment, but you haven't taken over the direction of their work process.
The contract specifies the what, the building, but the contractor decides the how, unlike an employee where the manager directs both.
Precisely. The difference between a fixed-price market contract and an employment contract highlights exactly the thing Coase was focused on. The substitution of market specification, the contract, with internal direction, the manager. Uncertainty is obviously present in both scenarios. People are trying to manage risk in both cases, but it doesn't explain the difference in the coordination mechanism.
So uncertainty is part of the picture, but it's not the ultimate reason why we have bosses and employees instead of just contracts. The defining feature is still direction versus price.
That was Coase's conclusion. The mode of coordination is the key differentiator, which then led him to his final step, checking if his economic definition actually matched up with reality. He wanted his theory to be useful, tractable, meaning you could analyze changes at the margin, but also realistic.
And how did he test the realism?
He compared his economic concept of the firm, defined by the supersession of the price mechanism through direction, with the long-established legal definition of the firm. The legal relationship between a master and servant, or as we'd say today, employer and employee.
That legal distinction is ancient. How does it line up with Coase?
It lines up beautifully. Legally, what's the main factor courts use to decide if someone is an employee versus an independent contractor? It's the right to control.
Control over the work.
Yes. Does the master or employer have the right to control how the work is done? Can they interfere, tell the servant or employee not just what task to perform, but when to do it, where to do it, and crucially, how to do it? That right to direct the manner of work is the legal hallmark of an employment relationship.
Whereas an independent contractor is typically hired to deliver a specific result, but they control the methods and process used to achieve it.
Exactly. So the legal definition hinged on the very same thing Coase identified as the economic essence: direction, control, the right to tell someone what to do and how to do it.
Wow, that's a really neat convergence. The economic reason, direction is cheaper than market contracts, aligns perfectly with the legal definition, the right to direct.
It confirmed for Coase that he wasn't just building an abstract model. He was describing the fundamental characteristic of the actual organizational structure we call a company. And because his theory was based on comparing costs at the margin, it made the economic analysis of firm size and structure possible, tractable, in a way that earlier theories hadn't allowed.
So when we look back now, decades after Coase published this seemingly simple paper, which apparently didn't make huge waves immediately because maybe it seemed too simple.
Yeah, it took a while to be fully appreciated.
What's the lasting impact? What's the big legacy of figuring out that firms exist because markets are expensive to use?
Oh, the legacy is enormous. Coase fundamentally shifted how economists and later business strategists thought about companies. Before him, the firm was often treated like a black box. In economic models, you're worried about production costs inside, but not why the box existed or how its boundaries were set.
Right, just assumed it was there.
Coase forced everyone to open the box and look at the organizational mechanics inside. He made us focus on coordination costs, both the transaction costs of the market and the organization costs of management, as the key factors determining why firms exist, how big they get, and what activities they perform internally versus externally. This basically launched the whole field of transaction cost economics.
Which is huge in business strategy today, right? Make versus buy decisions, outsourcing, organizational design.
Absolutely central. It provides the economic logic for all those strategic choices. And interestingly, His framework also helps clarify the different roles within a business that sometimes get muddled. He drew a useful distinction between just managing things and real enterprise.
How did he define those differently?
He suggested that pure management is about reacting to changes in prices or demand, and then efficiently rearranging the resources already under the firm's control. It's optimizing within the existing structure. Initiative, or enterprise, on the other hand, is about looking ahead, forecasting future wants, and then acting through the price mechanism, making new deals, creating new contracts, bringing new combinations of resources together, often by starting something new or fundamentally changing the firm's market interactions. That's the real risk-taking, market-shaping function.
And most business leaders probably do a bit of both.
They have to, Coase argued, precisely because of those transaction or marketing costs. It's often cheaper to combine the forecasting and the internal directing roles in one place.
That distinction is really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so the big takeaway for everyone listening, every single decision your company makes, whether it's acquiring another company, setting up a new internal department, deciding to outsource IT support, even just how bureaucratic its processes are, it's all fundamentally a trade-off, a calculation, conscious or not, about friction.
It really is. It's like a constant balancing act on a scale. On one side, you've got the transaction costs, the cost, time, and hassle of finding, negotiating, contracting, and enforcing deals out there in the open market. And on the other side, you have the internal organization costs, the cost of bureaucracy, the potential for managers to make mistakes, the communication delays, the meetings, and maybe even that extra salary you pay to compensate people for the lack of autonomy in a big hierarchy.
And your company's success, it's very shape and size, depends on constantly trying to find the sweet spot, that Coasian equilibrium, where the total cost is minimized, where using internal direction is, on balance, just slightly cheaper than dealing with the market for that specific activity.
Get the balance wrong, become too bloated and bureaucratic, and your internal costs swamp any savings on transaction costs.
Right. Or outsource absolutely everything to chase low prices, and you might drown in the transaction costs of managing all those contracts and suppliers.
And those costs aren't just abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. They show up as the real-world frustrations you feel every day at work. The endless meetings, the confusing memos, the processes that seem to make no sense.
Which brings us perfectly to our final challenge for you, the listener. Something to mull over. Think about your own workplace. Think about the last really frustrating internal memo you read, or the absolute worst meeting you had this week, or that bureaucratic process that drives you crazy.
We want you to put on your Coasian thinking cap and diagnose it.
Was that friction, that frustration, ultimately caused by a high transaction cost that your company successfully avoided by doing things internally? Was it the lesser of two evils? Or was it actually an excessive internal organization cost, a cost created by your company's own structure, bureaucracy, and management habits getting out of hand?
That's your company's Coasian diagnosis, and thinking about it might just reveal whether your firm's current boundaries and ways of working are actually helping or hindering its fundamental purpose.